Happy Monday, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Today's video is going to be about what happens if your car gets totaled while it's out on a rental. And there's multiple situations that you can find yourself in depending on how you purchase that vehicle. And I'm going to go over all of those different scenarios and walk you through it so that you can be prepared in the event that something like this happens. I hope that it doesn't, because definitely not fun, but it's definitely a possibility. In my 5 years of doing this, I've had 2 totaled cars. And for those of you that have been following along with me, then you know that this happened towards the end of November and December of last year. I had back-to-back incidents. They were 2 weeks apart, and I just couldn't believe it, especially because I had never experienced a totaled car before, let alone to have 2 of them happen simultaneously, and it was insane. So this is going to be a part of my series called Risk, which you can find on the homepage of my channel, and I go over all the things that could go wrong and how to be best prepared for them so that you can protect yourself. But before I jump into it, if you like this channel, please do show me your support by subscribing to my channel. I'm trying to hit 10K subscribers and we're almost there. Once I hit 10K subscribers, I'll be able to share more of my day-to-day Turo life through YouTube stories. So I'll be able to share even more experiences with you guys. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Now, there are 2 scenarios, kind of the way that I see it, that you can find yourself in if a car is totaled. Now, either you purchase that car outright, which makes the process a whole lot easier and simple, or you finance/lease the vehicle. So you don't own it outright. And this kind of rolls out in 2 different ways. So if you bought the car outright, you really have no worries. The total process, if a car gets totaled, is about 6 to 8 weeks through Turo. They use a third-party service provider called DMA. DMA will get in touch with you. They will give you comps on your car, and then they'll estimate what the cash value is and pay you out according to that. They give you a full report, something that you can review and go over. Now, if you own the car outright, they will ask you for proof of ownership. You have to send them some, photo evidence and documents showing that you own the car outright, and then they will send out a check in the mail in your name so that you can be made whole for that loss. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get what you paid for the car, because it all depends on what the cash value of the car was at the time of the accident or the incident that took place where the car got totaled. Now, if your car is financed or leased, it gets a little bit tricky, because you might be liable if the cash value doesn't match up to what you owe on the car. So I'm going to take you guys through a couple of scenarios that I personally experienced and let you know what you can do to prevent any financial liability. All right, so let's start with my Polaris. My Polaris Slingshot was the first one to get totaled. It was in a horrible accident, and everyone was fine, just an older couple that was kind of being reckless, right? So it turns out that the repairs were almost just as much as what the value of the car was, so they decided to total it out. Now, on that case, I actually made out really well because I purchased that car at such a good deal. I actually made some money on the payout of that vehicle. I think I made like a little over $1,000 or something like that. So that was really cool to kind of come out of it with actually making a little bit of money on that vehicle. So that was nice and easy. Now, the second scenario was far more complicated. So this was my Tesla Model S. It was totaled at like 3:30 in the morning. The person driving the car was not the renter. The renter wasn't even in the vehicle. So my actual renter lent the car to someone else. And if a car is being totaled at 3:30 in the morning on the toll roads here in Orange County, there is nothing good that is happening at that time. Now, my Tesla Model S was financed, and so there was a loan that I owed on that, and so I was really curious as to how that was going to play out. So initially, I start the process. It's like anything else. You submit a claim just as if you were to have, some damage to your car, same thing. Then they sent me over to DMA and kind of the estimation process began. So like I said, they provide you an entire report on what they believe the value of the car is based on the different comps that they've taken to cars that are similar and kind of fit the same make and model and features and things like that. Well, my initial estimate came back really low. It was almost, I think, like 10K below what I owed on the car, which means I was gonna get stuck with 10K in negative equity. And so I was really taken aback, and actually that kind of scared me, right? I was like, oh my gosh, I don't wanna have to come out of pocket $10,000 on this car. So I went over the comps that they sent me, and I realized that a lot of the features that my Model S had were missing in the comps. And so I kind of went back and forth with them, and what I actually had to do was get in touch with Tesla and get the original sales contract and the sticker to show exactly what that car came with. So the lesson that I learned is that if you do ever go through that process and you find that the value is below maybe what you owe or what you were expecting, you want to very thoroughly comb through the comps that they sent you so that, it really is an accurate depiction of what your vehicle is worth, right? And I actually kind of regret that I didn't spend more time going through that process because I was juggling 2 claims. It was the holiday season. A lot was going on. Had I had gone through it more thoroughly, it might have been a different outcome than what I'm about to share with you guys. So after I submitted my sales contract from Tesla directly and the sticker, they actually bumped up the value. I think it was about $5,000. So that's quite a big difference, right? But it was still 5K less than what I still owed on the car. So anywho, they ended up paying out what they believed the cash value was, which was still $5,000 below what I owed. And in this case, when it's financed, basically they ask you for all of your account information that pertains to your financing bank. They send that over, they get in touch with your financing bank, and they start going through the total loss process with them. They submit a check directly to your financing bank, and they settle out whatever that amount is with the bank. Then once that happens, your financing bank will come back to you and say, hey, okay, so we got this check from this insurance company, but you still owe, $5,000 on the car, or whatever the amount may be. I think it was roughly about $5,000 for me. Now, there's a few areas where I kind of took a hit in this situation. The first one was I had basic coverage on this car through Turo. So meaning I had that $3,000 deductible. So when a car gets totaled, that deductible actually still applies. I read some comments and messages from people asking me about that deductible, and they think that it should be covered, but it's actually not in the case of a total loss. You still are responsible for that deductible just like I was. So a little bit of the value was missing there. Then what happened in my case was, because it was a Tesla, throughout the rental period that I had with the car, I really opened up the mileage on that car because that car was really low maintenance. I personally drove that car a ton. I went on a bunch of road trips and put a whole lot of miles on it, way more than what I had anticipated putting on it. But the reason why I did that was because it was a great car, low maintenance, had no issues, and I was able to get good money for having it available for unlimited miles. Not thinking that, this was ever going to be an issue because I had never experienced a total car, so I just never anticipated it. Luckily, through my financing bank, I had gap insurance. So for those of you that are not familiar with gap insurance, I believe it stands for guaranteed auto protection, I believe. And basically what gap insurance is, if a car gets totaled, Gap covers the difference between what the insurance believes the car is valued at and what they pay out and what you owe. So in my case, if there was a $5,000 difference, I forget exactly what the numbers are, so please forgive me, then they would cover that middle portion that was missing, right? So luckily I carry gap coverage on all of my cars. So my gap kicked in because I still owed some money on the car. But when the gap process kind of went through, they didn't cover the entire amount that was owed, the gap that was owed. And I was really surprised to see that because I thought, hey, you know what? Gap covers whatever else is remaining, so I don't have to worry about it. After doing a little bit more research, I learned that there are a few things that can work against you when it comes to gap coverage, where gap won't cover the entire amount that is still remaining. And one of the main things was excess mileage. So, you know, when you get insurance on a car, you always tell your insurance company like, oh, you know, per year, I think I'm going to drive X amount of miles. Well, the miles that I stated were, of course, far lower than what I put on the car. So gap doesn't cover that excess depreciation on the car because you drove it so many more miles. So my gap did not cover the entire amount, but nonetheless, it did make a dent in it. So that's one thing that gap doesn't cover. And the other thing that gap doesn't cover is if you have modifications on your car. Let's just say, you know, you have this Vanderhaul and you put like, you know, $8,000 worth of modifications on it. You upgrade the wheels and, you know, whatever else you can do to this, right? Gap doesn't cover that because it only covers what originally came with the car and what the car is valued at. So long story short, in the end, the way that my Tesla panned out was that I ended up owing about roughly $3,000, which happened to be the same amount as my deductible from the gap. From my basic coverage on Turo. Had I been on standard insurance, it would have actually covered the difference and I probably wouldn't have had to come out of pocket, right? Because that's what I owed on the deductible. But nonetheless, if you've watched my videos, you know that I switch between basic and standard coverage depending on what's going on and if the rental season is busy. So I've always planned to have that $3,000 deductible on that car, so I was prepared to pay it, and I'm just glad that it wasn't anything worse than that. So what I've learned from all of this is that you definitely, if you have a car that is financed or leased, you want to make sure that you cover gap coverage on it. I was just really happy to find out that there wasn't an issue with exercising my gap coverage and there wasn't any sort of flags through my financing bank. So that's basically what happens when you have a car that gets totaled. If you own it outright, wait about 6 to 8 weeks and you'll get a check that comes directly to you. And if it's a car that is financed and you don't own it outright, then that check will go to the financing bank, and you know you want to carry that gap insurance in case the value of the car is not does not equal out to what you owe on the car. So that's very important. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot. When you go to purchase your cars, you have to make sure that you do the math and that you understand depreciation, especially if you're financing vehicles, because you could potentially take on a lot of financial liability and risk, and you don't want to end up owing all this money in the case of, you know, a car gets totaled or something really horrible happens. You know, you just don't want to find yourself in that position. Of course, buying cars outright and in cash is always a great thing if you can afford it, but not many people are in the position to do that. Now, you can buy slightly used cars for a good deal, and there's lots of other ways to do this, but in the event that you finance or lease, you want to make sure that you carry that gap. If you're wondering what happens if it's a car that's leased, then the gap coverage covers the remainder of your lease payments on the car. So that's how it works if you have a vehicle that's leased, and that's kind of been my experience. So please make sure that you are prepared and that you anticipate for these things to happen. Gap coverage is very inexpensive. I think, you know, it's anywhere between like $5 and $12 a month or something like that. It's very, very inexpensive. And you're better off just paying for it so that you have that peace of mind that if anything happens, that you're going to be covered, at least for the most part, right? And even in the case of my Tesla, yes, I had to come out of pocket for that roughly $3,000, but I looked at it as a whole for all the years that I had it on the platform, and I was way in the green. So even though I had to come out of pocket for that amount of money, I was still okay in the long run. So you really want to think about your cars in those terms. Know what the value of your cars are. Make sure that, you're monitoring your mileage and that you're really allocating it in a way that makes sense for the depreciation of the car, and that your loan to value really matches up, because that is very critical in the event that these things happen. Now, of course, I've been doing this for a long time, 5 years, 2,000 plus trips. Having a car get totaled seems to be very rare, but it does happen, right? Your car could literally go out on its first trip, and that could happen because these are just variables in this type of marketplace. So you just want to be prepared in the event that something like that happens. All right, guys, so this was a very, very common question that I had, a huge gray area for many people. So hopefully this provides some clarity to you guys on how all of this works. I really didn't have any problems with Turo's process of handling totaled cars. I thought, it went swiftly and it was quite efficient. I know these days support is a little bit slow because of the pandemic. So if you find yourself in this type of situation, just be patient, hang in there to the best of your abilities. Things do get resolved, and sometimes they just take a little bit longer, especially if the case is a bit more complicated and there's a lot of factors playing into it. But overall, I had a pretty good experience, I would say, and it definitely relieved some anxiety that I had about this topic. So hopefully this is useful for you guys. Make sure you get that gap coverage. Do a little bit of research. There's some great literature online about how gap works. I'm actually going to post a link in my description below to give you a little bit of information on how gap works, so that you can kind of assess for yourself. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Happy Monday. Have a great weekend. Once again, my name is Saimah, and this is Saimah's Experience. Leave me your questions and comments below, and if you like this channel, be sure to subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Saimah's Experience. I'm posting updates on the day-to-day of business all the time. So definitely give you a glimpse inside of my life and how I do this on a daily basis. Take care, guys. Talk soon.